Riddle me this, snooker fans. How can we be in the most competitive snooker era, an era where there is supposedly the best strength and depth the sport has ever seen, and yet this man, Judd Trump, continues to dominate in the way that he is? Okay, he didn't win last week, and in fact, he actually took a bit of a battering in the final from Kyren Wilson, who we'll get to shortly. But it's now 15 consecutive quarterfinals that Judd Trump has reached, all coming this year. That is ridiculous consistency. This season, it's now 4 finals. Obviously, he's won 2, lost 2, a few other quarterfinals, and a semi-final to boot. He is ridiculous. Even when he's not playing well, he gets to win. And it's that kind of aura that Ronnie O'Sullivan had. I'm sure, Higgins, Davis, Hendry, Williams, they all had in their absolute pomp as well, where as soon as someone plays him, it's almost like they've been beaten. Judd, he's not just got an amazing A game, he's got a B game, C game, D game, all the way through to Z game. He is fantastic. And like I say, how can this happen in an era where the strength and depth is supposedly so strong? The UK Championship's around the corner, and I do think he's going to be challenging for that as well. But look, we already know how consistent, what a monster Judd Trump is. So what else did we learn from last week's Northern Ireland Open? And for me, I learned something brand new. And this was this rule that came in that really entertaining match between Hussein Fafai and Jimmy White. The standard, wasn't fantastic throughout the match. But that last frame, you couldn't take your eyes off it. And it, of course, included this pivotal moment where it was a foul committed by Hussein Fafai. And you know what? Until the rule was explained to me, I had no idea why that was a foul. But you have to say, unbelievable refereeing from the referee. Not only to see it, but also to have that 100% conviction and confidence that you got it right. Fantastic from him. Not the first time it's ever happened in the sport, but the first time I've ever seen it. But now looking at the players who really impressed last week, and, if you thought that we already had too many young emerging Chinese talents, well then I've got another one to add to the list, and that's Pang Junxu. This wasn't his breakthrough. In fact, this was his 3rd career semi-final after reaching a semi-final last year and also reaching the 2023 WSCT final where he lost to Mark Selby. And, he's beaten Luca Brissell 3 times already this season. Okay, Luca Brissell's not having a fantastic year, but that's still a very impressive record. And his match against Neil Robertson was fantastic as well. He was thoroughly deserving of that win. And to come back from 4-3 behind and make an 80-plus break and then a century in the decider was fantastic. And look, he pushed Kyren Wilson pretty close in the semi-final as well. And there's such a plethora of Chinese players that are coming through. You really want there to be a similar number coming through from, England, Wales, Scotland, mainland Europe as well. But just the setup at a grassroots level that China has seemingly is impenetrable at the moment. And obviously they're not making that massive step up yet because there's so many top class players still around in their sort of late 30s and 40s. But when they disappear, the future of the sport really does look like it's going to be heavily dominated from that part of the world. Elliot Slessor, he also made a semi-final, and for him it was his 4th career semi-final. All 4 semis that he's made have come in the UK, 2 in Northern Ireland now. He's also had one at the British Open and also one at the Welsh Open. And Elliot, the kind of player who is journeyman harsh? It might be a little bit harsh, but he hasn't really done an awful lot else. Consistency has been Elliot's biggest hiccup. But 4 semi-finals in a career, not many players have that kind of record. The shame for him is as soon as he gets to a semi-final, he does typically capitulate. And that happened even though, you're playing Judd Trump, you have little hope going into a match like that anyway. But another impressive week. Okay, he didn't beat any top 16 players en route to that semi-final. But still big wins, including that early win against Joe O'Connor. That was big for him. And he's always been a player that's hovered around that just about inside the top 48 to top 50, but never really looked like a top 32 player. That's obviously his challenge, but the problem for Elliot is you look at most players from sort of 33 up into sort of 50, 60 in the world, and you could make a case for at least half of them being a top 32 player, but of course, not all of them can do. We bang on about all these players with massive potential finding consistency, but it's difficult to do that when every single player is in the same position. But a good week for him. A shame it could have capitulated, like I said, at the end. But very promising to get to a semi-final, a fourth semi-final. And the question that I keep on saying on this video is, can he push on? And then Louis Heathcote, he deserves a mention for his run to the quarterfinals last week, and it included massive wins over, firstly, Mark Selby, that 4-3 win in the last 64, and then he followed that up with a big win against Jimmy Robertson, and Jimmy's been very consistent this season as well, so those are two massive wins for him. And, he lost 5-1 to Elliot Slessor in the quarterfinals, which was a big match for both players, with a big opportunity to get to the semis. But Louis Heathcote, really impressive. I quite like him as a player. I think he's got potential, and again, I say this because I've said this already. So many players have potential. It's all about what you can do with it and whether you can find that consistency. It's his second quarterfinal in his career, but his only other one came at the shootout, and whether you can really count that or not, it's a one-frame lottery, really. This was his first proper quarterfinal, and it was well worth it. Big wins, like I say. And, copy and paste from what I said about Elliot Slessor. Can he push on? Can he find that consistency? That is the massive question. But now we have to talk about the champion, Kyren Wilson. And how good is this for a first-time world champion to come into a season with all that extra, pressure, that extra spotlight on you? And he's already won 2 big titles this season. Obviously, this follows up his win in China when he won the Xi'an Grand Prix. Both of those finals, he beat Judd Trump, and this time convincingly beat Judd Trump. And okay, Judd never really got going, never was fantastic in the final, but you still got to beat him. And like I say, Judd's been ridiculous this season. You don't beat him 9-3 by a fluke. Even when Judd's playing several gears below his usual best, he can still win matches. So not only to beat him, but to beat him so resoundingly in a big final. A final in a tournament that Judd Trump has already won 4 times before. This is a massive victory for Kyren, and it's looking like it could be up there with one of the very best seasons we've seen from a first-time world champion. Okay, Judd obviously won 6 titles in his season following on from winning his first world title in 2019. But most players struggle. Mark Selby, I remember him winning the German Masters. I think that was the only tournament he won in his season. Neil Robertson, he only won 1 title as well. Stuart Bingham didn't win anything. Luca Brissell didn't win anything either. It's a big monkey to have on your shoulders when you win a world championship and suddenly you're just thrust into a new position, a new sort of limelight that you're not experienced or not familiar with. And he's dealt with it so well. 2 titles in the first, quarter of the season. That's some going. And like I say, to beat Judd in both of those finals is even more impressive. And the question now is, obviously we're kind of in this time of the year where the UK Championship and the Masters are around the corner. Can he win one of those? But yeah, very, very good start to the season. Very impressive. And now, just to finish off this video, I wanted to briefly talk about what's coming up in the snooker world. And as I've already alluded to, we are in that period of the year, the period of the snooker season, where we've got massive tournaments coming up. And the International Championship next week represents the last chance for players to either get into the Champion of Champions, that happens the week after, or secure a top 16 seeding for the UK Championship at the end of the month. And if we start with the Champion of Champions first, obviously that's a tournament where 16 players are invited, and ideally those are 16 players who have won tournaments in the past 12 months. But because of how dominant players like Judd Trump, Ronnie O'Sullivan, Mark Allen, Kyren Wilson have been, tournaments haven't really been shared out. They've been won by a select few of players. So that means we've only got 13 players guaranteed a spot. And that means there's 3 spots left up for grabs. And what that also means is at least 2 of those spots are going to have to be made up of backups. And the backups come up from the highest ranked players who are not already on that list. So as it stands, Luke Brissell and Sean Murphy look like they're guaranteed spots. Obviously, that could change with how they perform and how others perform around them at the International Championship. But it looks like those 2 are basically guaranteed to be in the tournament as well. And then if we need a third player, then Ding Junhui comes into the equation as well. So plenty to play for at the International Championship in that regard. But like I say, it's also the seeding cutoff for the UK Championship, which is massive for a lot of big players at the moment. And if we look at the rankings at the moment, this is how it stands. And I'd say you'd have to imagine from Zhai Wei and up. So the top 13 currently in the world, I would imagine are basically guaranteed their spot. I'd also say John Higgins, he's potentially in a little bit of danger, but I'd say he's pretty safe as well. But below that, it gets very tasty. And there's only £200 separating Tom Ford in 16th and Neil Robertson in 17th. And a massive issue for not only Tom Ford, but also Jack Jones as well, is both of them failed to qualify for the International Championship. So they have no chance of trying to increase that gap between them and the chase and pack. So it's going to be a very, very nervy sort of wait at home whilst they look at the results come in and just hope that results go for them. I think Tom Ford, if he makes it, he's very, very fortunate. And there's quite good prize money on offer at the International Championship as well. And particularly, those 4 players there, from Neil Robertson in 17th to Chris Raikkonen in 21st, all of them are in the International Championship. And just winning their first match will guarantee them £4,000. The bad news from a Neil Robertson perspective and good news from a Tom Ford perspective is that Neil's played 2 matches in China so far this season and lost both of them. So, there's potential that he could lose first round and then that's it. That's his chance gone. But yeah, Tom Ford, I'd be very surprised if I see him in the top 16 at the UK Championship. Jack Jones, well, fate's out of his hands. He's still got a bit of a cushion, that £11,000 cushion that he's got. But even that, particularly because he's not there to try and win points, is very edgy for him. And I'd say at least 2 players who are not in the top 16 at the moment will get in there for the UK Championship.